Well, good evening. Happy Thursday. Welcome to another News9 Digital Extra. We are here in the News9 Digital Content Center for the second of two Decision 2024 Special Election Digital Extras. Joining us tonight is U.S. House Ohio District 6 Democrat nominee Michael Kripchak. Michael, thanks so much for coming in person to join us here in Steubenville tonight. I know it's been a busy time, especially with a primary in March and now a special election in June. You've been on the road a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've been going around campaigning, but it's ultimately been going around asking people what they need and how I can help best help them down in DC. Make the federal government work for them.
It's a large district spanning the whole way from Youngstown, the south down to Marietta. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of counties, a lot of different, some suburbs, some rural areas. What have you kind of learned traveling this large district?
You know, in all honesty, you know, people brought up to me that it was going to be really hard given the different demographics, but really everyone wants the same thing, right? They want inflation to get in check. They want a government that works for them, not against them. And, you know, specifically with the farmers, I was at first receiving advice saying like, oh, don't bring up farmers when you're in cities. But I said, you know, I'm going to do it anyway. And, you know, even in like Youngstown, or even down in Steubenville, like anytime I mention the farmers, I get an audience full of nodding heads because everybody understands how we're all different pieces in the one puzzle that makes our community and our country work.
What type of impact has this run had on you? Again, it's been busy, but I'm sure your maybe ideas or just how you approach things has changed, not with much of a political background coming into this. How's it impacted you? What have you learned?
I've gone through 2 different pairs of shoes that I've worn out. You know, it's our initial mission, right? Bring back manufacturing, help our teachers, help our farmers, right? That has largely stayed the same, but like specifically with the farmers. So I've been spending the most amount of my time these last few months focusing on the farmers because that was my biggest blind spot. That was the piece of the puzzle that I understood the least. Like I was telling you before we went live, like I've been down to the Carrollton livestock auction. I went down to the Ohio State Small Farm Extension class that they had down in Carrollton. And it's with that, my initial piece was, okay, cool. We need to decrease the influence of corporate control so that farmers can own the seeds that they're planting, repair the equipment that they work on. But in the majority of our district, we have small and medium-sized farms. Sorry, I'll come closer to the mic. We have small and medium-sized farms, and those aren't the problems that they struggle with. What they want is stable prices, and then tax relief. One of the things I want to do in my first 100 days in office after June 11th is to push through a farmstead exemption, which is basically talking. I heard this time and time again. Farmers telling me, you know, my kids want to get on a farm and they want to take over the farm, but they can't because the taxes are too much when they try to pass it down to their next of kin. And this is what's forcing our farmers to sell their land to say, you know, China's buying up a lot of our farmland or bigger ag is buying up a lot of our farmland. And this is a way to help our farmers to be able to keep their family and their plots of lands in their family.
We want to remind everyone, you have a chance to ask a potential future congressman a question. Maybe it's an issue that's important to you. Maybe it's something that you're curious about his background or why he decided to get into this race in the first place. You can drop the comments and we will approach them and we'll get them in to ask as well as we go along here tonight. Before we get into some issues, though, I do want to go back. This is a long district. It's it's a lot of ground to cover. Has that given you any difficulties? Have you had any troubles, or do you foresee that being an issue going forward?
You know, in all honesty, no, because there are several offices you would have throughout the entire district as a representative. And look, I got to admit, the drive feels shorter and shorter every time. Like when I got down here for this drive, I was like, oh, I'm here already. You know, when I first started doing this, it seemed like an incredibly long hour and a half. You know, it's just logistics and putting in the miles, right? It'd be the worst part is the time on the road when I'm driving when I can't be doing other things.
We actually have our first question in for tonight, and it goes
Okay.
along with our first topic, which is energy. So
All right.
I will basically, I'll pop it up, but Kathy is saying your opponent believes in drill, baby, drill. Do you believe we should diversify more when it comes to using energy? I'm going to dovetail that into my question, which is basically Representative Johnson served on the House Energy and Commerce Committee for a decade while he was in Congress. So with energy independence remaining a key factor, what's your stance on, how the U.S. can get to be more energy independent?
Look, the answer is diversification. And it's something I think my opponent maybe just doesn't understand, that natural gas, just like petroleum, it's all traded on a commodities market, right? So this is controlled by the cost of the global supply. And no matter how many hundreds of years my opponent likes to claim that the Utica Shale can provide energy for the world, I heard he said on your show a few days ago, that is just not a true stat to any extent. The Utica Shale has about 1% of the world's supply of natural gas, as the other 99% is controlled by OPEC Plus and Russia. Right. So making our economy dependent on fracking specifically, it just makes us dependent on their control of how much they're actually adding to the supply in the market. And a key example of this is when you look at North Dakota, right? They had the fracking boom with petroleum a few decades ago, right? What happened? Saudi Arabia said, oh, we don't like how much you're putting into this. So great. We're going to drop the price of oil to an extent where we're going to put your fracking companies out of business. And that's exactly what happened. Ghost towns appeared, right? And that is not something we want to happen to our district, because that is exactly what they will do when they get us dependent on fracking, because fracking has a price floor. Fracking is so much more expensive to get to the natural gas than, say, someone like Russia has to do. Or when it comes to petroleum, say like Florida and Texas, it's so much easier for them to drill the resources than it is for an area like ours. And fracking itself is inherently inflationary. That means it's always going to get more expensive, especially because once you take off that first part, it takes more and more work, more and more pressure to be applied back down into these wells in order to get usable product out of it. So when it comes to green energy, look, yes, we need to start diversifying. Yes, there are options. I mean, when a country like Arabia is leading the world in solar panel development, like that should be a key right there, that, okay, if they're doing it, one of the biggest oil suppliers on the planet is doing it, we need to get behind it. And we could talk about more about this later to get to the next question. But this is why I think it's imperative for us as a country and us as a district to start pushing for the commercialization of fusion energy.
Well, and that kind of leads into my next question, whether it's wind, solar, there's several options.
Yep.
Do you see Ohio District 6 as a place that's ready to excel in this? Do you think it's there from an infrastructure standpoint and beyond that?
Look, one of the issues we have here in Ohio is that we live in what you could call a Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold, sunny, but not too sunny, windy, but not too windy, right? And when there's a gold rush, be the one making the shovels. This is why our piece that we can contribute is manufacturing the advanced materials that are required to make these technologies work. And again, as I mentioned before, with the Fusion Project, there are lots of different fusion initiatives. There are lots of different methods that scientists and labs around the country and around the world are looking that can actually make fusion energy commercializationable. There we go. I think that's a word. But we want to be the one manufacturing the materials that all of those techniques are going to require to actually make this technology work. So say with our coal miners, right? I got the United Mine Workers endorsement, not only because I told them I will absolutely work to guarantee their pensions, as of course, but then also saying, look, coal is one of the most expensive pieces on our grid right now, but there's a lot of things we could do with coal that's not burning it up. We need it for carbon fiber. We could use it to develop this material called graphene, which is stronger than diamond, lighter than steel, and tens of times, hundreds of times more conductive than copper, right? And that's an example of we become the hub of manufacturing this advanced material. Then all of a sudden, we'll be able to transmit electricity over long distances to someplace where it is windier, someplace where it is sunnier. We could get that electricity up here.
All right, let's talk now about switch it up. We'll talk about drugs and fentanyl,
Mhm.
opioid epidemic, which just has continued to plague this area for
Yeah.
years.
Yep.
And this fentanyl right now seems to be the hot one that's making its way through the district
Yep.
by way of the river, by way of major
Yep.
interstates that run crisscross perpendicular right through
Mhm.
District 6. How
Mhm.
will you portray this to your colleagues in DC if elected as an issue to secure necessary assistance for Eastern Ohio?
I'd be shocked to find anyone in Congress or anyone anywhere who doesn't think this is an issue, right? We've had a nationwide opioid crisis, and fentanyl has only exacerbated this problem, right? This has been developing over years and years. And so, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna have to do much of a sell job when it comes to that. I think you maybe want to ask another question on that. I guess, what are you saying?
So if it is sold, then what's the approach to address it then? I mean, is it securing
Mm.
funding and bringing back? Is it mental health places to get people that are suffering?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So there's two issues on this, right? Our mental health um, issue that we're facing throughout the entire country, right? We're one of the most medicated countries on the planet, right? We clearly have an issue when it comes to mental health, of addressing these issues. It means getting into schools. There's a great program down in Woodsfield, Ohio. I was down there a few weeks ago, and one of their mental health clinics actually has a group that they go into schools and they do a project with the students to help them become aware of different mental health techniques, right? And this gets into my education initiative, which we need to fund our public schools better. We need to respect our teachers more, and give them the resources that they need to help train our kids, to be good citizens, but also prepare them for life and in possible careers. So it's an education thing. Like, look, to tackle something as big as this is going to take a multi-piece method, right? So it's helping with mental health, but then it's also in general giving people hope, right? We need to show people and give them the opportunities and empowerment, because opportunity without empowerment is a false promise. To give them the empowerment to achieve careers where they could actually earn a thrivable wage, right? It used to be several decades ago, you used to be able to have a minimum wage job and still get a loan and afford to pay off a house. That's impossible now. It's impossible now. We need to open up economic opportunities for our citizens. And this is also why it's so vitally important for us to get our local economies circulating again. Because the economy is all about circulation. And this is one of the problems with turning into an extractive economy, such as if we try to go even more full in on fracking than we already are. It's that money is getting taken out of our district, shipped off to companies based in Texas and California, giving us minimal jobs after hundreds of thousands of jobs were promised to us, and they never developed over the last decade that we've been doing this. We need local small businesses manufacturing here to empower our economies, rebuild our downtowns, just like we used to have.
Continuing our conversation with U.S. House Ohio District 6 nominee, Democrat nominee Michael Kripchak. Michael is with us here this evening in the News9 Digital Content Center, about a quarter of our way through our conversation tonight, talking about all types of issues and topics that apply to folks here in the Ohio Valley and Ohio District 6. We have some more questions too that we'll get to
Cool.
in a few moments, but we talked a little bit about education, so I want to stick with that. Clearly, there are some things that you'd like to see changed in the modern day education system. How do you think it stands as it is, and what might be some of those things?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it's teaching to the test has not worked out, right? This was an initiative, that nationwide initiative that started about the time I was getting out of high school. I graduated in 2000 from Cheney. And it's just only picked up steam since then, where I talk to teachers now and they say they can't even begin educating their kids until the standardized test is done a few months into the term, right? It's not working. Right. If it was working and we were producing the smartest kids on the planet and they were the most well-rounded and diverse students on the planet, like, great, awesome, let's keep doing it. But that's not happening. Right. It's getting rid of teaching to the test, bringing in what we had at the Air Force Academy, which we called the whole person concept: mental, emotional, physical health. It's helping fund our trade schools so that we could expose kids to these skills, so that maybe they have a better aptitude for trade skills than they would at something that would require them to go to college, right? But all of this requires an actual concerted effort to shift our focus, right? I know it was STEM and now it's STEAM. Like, okay, so I'm going to break into a story real quick. So one of my professors at the academy, he went on a trip to China, and when he came back, we were talking about it, and he said all the educators there said, you know, we have a lot of kids that are really good at following the diagram, following the schematic, designing the circuit by doing the equations, but they didn't have that creative piece. And they were asking him, how do we help our students develop this creative piece? Because us as a culture, we don't have that. That creativity piece is one of the strongest parts of American culture, period, around the world. And these pushing to teaching the test, reducing our curriculum options, pushing it just down to just, okay, can you do the math? Can you solve the problem? Can you fill in the right bubble? It has been a detriment to us as a culture, and especially to us, to our student bodies.
You mentioned trades and skill-based jobs, something that's extremely needed here in Ohio. You know, we hear from state officials all the time that there's more jobs in Ohio than can be filled. One of those reasons is because there's a need for jobs that you might not necessarily have to go to a 4-year college for. What's your stance on these jobs and career centers and technical centers that are offering these opportunities for kids to graduate from high school, get a certificate, and go to work within a month after or less?
Well, it's ultimately the volume of students that can make it through. Because like, as we talked about, I think last time, Eastern Gateway Community College, right, just went under, right, by mismanagement. Right. Our community college system is so vitally important. This is one thing I learned while I was out in California. They have an amazing community college system so that kids can work to get certificates. And then if they decide to go to a 4-year degree, they already got their base credits done. And so they've been able to then go to a UCLA or something like that out there to actually finish up their degree for half the cost than it would have been anyways. Look, this stuff requires support from the government. Right. It requires initiatives, both local and nationwide. The job of the federal government is to get funds to our local communities to do what they need to do. And that's going to be different for each community, right? Some of that's going to be infrastructure. Some of that's going to be helping fund technical schools, right? But it's about making those opportunities available for our communities to actually get these programs off the ground.
What would your plan be for some of that what's the government's role in helping aid that?
Well, I think one of the biggest roles is with unions, right? Our unions can take a more prime role when it comes to actually getting people trained up and then actually having them stay current in their training if they move off their job. I think our unions in our country need need to be a better focal point in the business community for this reason, to help nurture an actual workforce, right? A lot of these jobs people aren't enamored with for one reason or another, but one of the reasons is pay, right? We have an issue where productivity has been detached from for nationwide GDP productivity has been detached from people's actual productivity. And we need to reestablish that baseline. And I believe that unions have a strong role to play in that. And so, I mean, the short answer is, look, we need government funding in order to start these schools up. We need government funding, like bringing it back to farmers. We have next to no large animal vets in our state. And I was talking to a farmer, and they were saying, well, actually, there's a program that does do large animal vet training, and 200 people apply to it, but they only got slots for 5 people, right? That's a situation where the government may need to come in to help actually make the program expand their ability out to train more large animal vets. So it's ultimately using the government's funds and abilities and connections to actually enhance training opportunities for people. Does that make sense? Or was that still too beating around the bush?
No, I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, no, I'm
Cool.
with you.
Yeah. So again, I've been spending the last 2 months talking to lots of farmers. So, and the large animal vet thing, it's a real issue now.
Yeah.
It's a huge issue for our farmers. And again, We have programs that do it, but they only have slots for like five different new students to come in each term. And that's something that the government can provide help, and actually broadening that to be able to have more people come into those programs at once.
But outside of that, outside of farming, though, I mean, there's an opportunity for these certificate programs in a lot of things. I've done a couple stories recently on marijuana with the legalization of recreational. There's going to be a lot of jobs in that field. People can go get a certification. Another one I recently did was on flying and private aviation and the need for pilots and air traffic control personnel. So this is across the board, and that's not even talking about your plumbers and pipe fitters, your electricians, your carpenters, those types of jobs.
And the list of problems that other countries, especially if you look to Europe, have actually already addressed a lot of these issues. Again, such as making these programs more available to people. Right? The wheel has already been made. It's just we need to actually learn what they do right, bring it here, Americanize it so it better matches our people, just like we do with everything, right? Chinese food isn't Chinese food here. Here, it's American Chinese food, right? Pizza in Europe is totally different than pizza here. We have American pizza, right? But the basics on how to address these problems, there's so much to learn from these problems already being solved elsewhere. And for one reason or another, and that's a whole other discussion, we have been hesitant to adapt our programs and even backslid to some degree, such as we have with schools.
Want to pop this one up from Margie. She asks, will you open a local office in the Ohio Valley? Have you thought about, if you are to be elected, where you might kind of set up shop and where you might have some offices?
Yeah, I believe there's 3 offices that get opened up. Yeah, and I was going to have those evenly split throughout the district. I feel being the most populous, one of them would be up somewhere in Mahoning. I always imagine one being here in Steubenville, and then probably one closer to Marietta. I think that's doing a disservice to Monroe and Belmont. So just off the top of my head, I would probably say Belmont there in that case. Sorry, I haven't thought through that.
It's okay. It's important. And that brings up an interesting segue that I kind of want to go into, which is that this district has been red for 14 years since Bill Johnson beat Charlie Wilson back in 2010. So this
man that apparently only sponsored 2 bills in his 12 years in Congress.
So it would be a seat flip if you were to get it. Has that presented any additional challenges? What have you kind of sensed from people in both parties around the area?
Yeah, I look, and I heard a story where my opponent also encountered something like this, where someone's saying, I can't vote for you because, in my case, I can't vote for you because you're a Democrat. And my response to those citizens is always, that's okay, sir, because we're all Americans first. And that's what matters. And I think people need to understand that I am doing this out of a call to service, out of a call to duty. It's something that was instilled to me at the Air Force Academy, and it's called servant leadership. It's about serving the people. Now, I know Democrats over the last several decades, for one reason or another, whether it's true or not, working class people have felt that the Democratic Party has left them. I am here to help the working class. I am here to reduce corporate influence, corporate control. And this is something that no matter what my opponent likes to say, right, go look at where his funding is coming from for his campaign. Go look at his history. Go look at the bills that he's working with his colleagues to get through, such as a bill currently that's working its way through either the House or the Senate. I think it's the Senate. It's called unitization. Makes it easier for big oil companies to force farmers to sell their mineral rights to them. Force them to do it if they're not getting a contract, if they're not okay with the contract that they're being offered. Right? That's what my opponent is for. I think we can all agree that money plays too much of an outsized role in our politics And if we look at inflation, 52% of inflation right now is due to just increased corporate profits. Ain't nothing wrong with making a profit, but there is something wrong with about abusing your workers in order to get there. And I am doing this for you because the system is out of whack and we need to make it work for all of us. And it's the main reason why everyone is so angry, right? Our country is one of the most successful nations ever to exist on the face of this earth, and we are not getting a fair shake from it. And people feel that, and they know that. And I am working to earn your vote in order to fight for you to make sure that you do.
Let's go to the economy now. I'll talk about the economy. I'm going to
Uh-huh.
talk about the budget, and I want to talk about economic development.
Mhm.
Let's start first with the economy. The U.S. has only had a balanced budget on time twice in the last 54 years. I looked it up today. It happened once during Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency and once during the Bill Clinton presidency. This past year alone, as we've seen for several years, we've seen several more temporary solutions to the budget. Do you believe the country needs budget reform, and how can we establish a more permanent solution to this?
First of all, it is in the Constitution that the U.S. will pay all its debts. This threat that we're going to default on paying our debts on time is the most destructive thing that anyone or any party or anyone could do to our economy. That's first. We should never even threaten to default on our debt, period. We are currently the worldwide currency. International trade is done with the US dollar. Anything that threatens our position in that role is threatening American stability, American hegemony, and our power and influence around the world. The deficit. We have seen some of the greatest growth in our nation in the time period that you mentioned, right? A lot of fuss has been made on having a non-balanced budget, but the government's loss is your gain. Look at it this way. Well, first of all, budget balance under Bill Clinton, right? What happened immediately after that? Stock market crash, right? That wasn't really good. So apparently having a balanced budget didn't fix anything there. If the government injects $1 million into the economy and then taxes that back out of the economy, what happened with the economy? Did it grow at all? No, it stayed stagnant. Deficit is different from the debt, but it has to be mentioned that the one time the national debt went down to zero was under Andrew Jackson, and we had an economic crash afterwards because the deficit and the debt relate to how much money is actually in the economy for the economy to actually flow and work with. All of this changed after we left the gold standard. Now, I know some of this is really hard to figure out. It's taken me a while to figure out and understand, but this is the way the system actually works today. Once we got off the gold standard, the word national debt doesn't mean debt anymore. It's just dollars we own, and we print the money. If people are worried about the deficit being out of whack, you know what? Maybe we need to raise taxes on the wealthiest amongst us. But that's not so much a solution as is getting our economies to function. Because if you take $1 and we're doing, say, a sales tax, okay, so I sell you something, great, cool. Then you sell me something. Every single one of these transactions gets taxed, right? That means the deficit would be going down every single one of those transactions. What's happening right now is money is not flowing. Money is stagnant. The real swamp is money getting collected at the top and not circulating amongst the rest of us. That's the real swamp that's at play here in America today. So ultimately, a way to solve the deficit issue, if we're talking about it that way, is to get our local economies flowing once again. I know that's several steps removed. I totally understand that. But when you start looking into these issues, when you start looking into the history of things, like this is how things actually work. And I don't care if any other politician tells you that. I don't think many politicians are going to tell you to go educate yourself on the issue and expose yourself to stuff that maybe you weren't exposed to before. I guarantee you, you will get a better understanding of things, as I have from my own research on these topics.
it kind of leads us into inflation, which has been hitting people hard. Grocery store prices out of control sometimes, gas prices hard on people's wallets. What would your immediate plan be if you took office to try and help bring inflation down?
Look, let's first address my grocery store. I don't think he gave a specific answer on how he was going to get his prices down. Um, well, his family owns a grocery store. He runs it, parts of it for them. Um, look, there's not enough competition in the market. As I said earlier, 52% of inflation is simply due to increased corporate profits. That's why the stock market is going through the roof. But as I mentioned earlier, we aren't feeling that at our level. We're not feeling any of that because it gets siphoned to the top, doesn't circulate back around down to us. So it means enforcing our trust busting laws that we have, making sure that they're getting applied correctly, and not just the tech companies, right? The two largest grocery store chains in America are attempting to merge right now. Like, that's unacceptable. We talk about skyrocketing prices at the grocery store. But again, to bring it back to the farmers, this is a problem they're facing too, because there's been over consolidation. You know, John Deere controls X amount of percent of the farm equipment market now, over consolidation. So competition in the market is one of the answers. Second answer, energy costs, right? We need to help calm the world down. Specifically when it comes to the former president, we have taken a back seat from when it comes to our role of being a world power. We are the big kid on the block. If we are not there, other, I would argue, nefarious powers such as Russia and China and Iran will move in to then exert their influence. And they need a disruptive influence on things because that's how they further weaken us. So reestablishing our diplomatic corps around the world, making sure our diplomatic corps has funding, making sure conflicts like Ukraine get solved as fast as possible in countries like Ukraine that are dealing with attacking nations such as Russia, to make sure that gets put to bed right quick. Because conflicts around the world end up making energy prices soar, right? So lack of competition causes inflation, lack of supply. Well, we'll get to that in a second. Energy costs is one of the biggest causes of inflation. This is also why we need to diversify our energy sources. This will bring energy costs down, which reduce costs in general for food. Again, talking to farmers, for manufacturers and shipping companies. And then lastly, increased supply. This is why we need to get manufacturing going again in our country, because we increase competition, and that we increase supply, which inherently increases competition, which then decreases inflation. So ultimately, the answers are get energy costs under control, diversification, calming world conflicts, decreasing monopolistic control, enforcing our monopoly laws, and increasing supply. That means increased competition, increased manufacturing here in our country.
Let's go to economic development. Certain parts of Ohio are booming with economic development over the past few years. Licking County lands Intel, billion-dollar industry and corporation there. Another Honda, one out in Marysville. As companies are coming to Ohio, what role can District 6 play? Might not land a billion-dollar corporation in along the Ohio River. It's possible. Not saying never say never.
We want to build the next billion-dollar corporation. That's my answer. But go on.
So how do we get that done here?
So it's manufacturing in general. Look, what I've been saying to people is that Intel and Ultium Cells, which is to the north, the battery plant that's to the north of the district, they shouldn't have to go anywhere else but Ohio to get the materials they need to make their products, right? And we can make that happen. This is why we need an advanced manufacturing hub here in the 6th. Why will this happen? Because we have our natural resources of coal, and coal can be used to develop multiple materials, because we have the space and the area and some of the actual buildings still standing that can be used and retrofitted to actually be manufacturers of future products. And then thirdly, it's in our blood, it's in our bones, it's in our heritage, right? This is what we do, and this is what we can do again. This is what makes our people so amazing. We have a history, even going back to, say most of the European immigrants that came over here. They came over here with trade skills, with crafting skills. This is why so many of our downtowns are gorgeous, because the talents that they brought here and the work ethic that they brought here. Also, because of our location, right? You mentioned all of the highways that are causing us to be a center for human trafficking, which again, we need to help rebuild the economy so people stop going towards desperate means to make money. But our place when it comes to between Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Columbus, and even when you start looking West Virginia, we have an opportunity to be a nexus point that can supply the materials for other companies around our district, right? How we build up is by helping the districts around us with what they need to grow. And that in turn will cause us to grow.
So a follow up to that, we've seen success just across the river in the Northern Panhandle. The Form Energy in Weirton is going to be opening up here this summer. How do you, is there an ability there to kind of work across state lines with some of maybe the reps or House reps in Western Pennsylvania, the Northern Panhandle? How do you feel about, going across state lines and might have to go across party lines to benefit the region?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Intel and Altium, look, my entire plan deals with working with our, geographic neighbor congressional delegations. Because that's how we get buy-in for the programs we want here, right? If we help them understand how our development will help them, right? And then our development and then their development will help ours, because again, it gets things flowing. So working across party lines, look, so as I mentioned, like the first thing I want to get done is this farmstead exemption for farmers. One of the main reasons I want to do that is because if there's anything the parties can agree on, it's helping out our farmers, right? I think all sides understand the national security risk it is selling our farmland to foreign powers, such as it is selling our natural resources to foreign powers, which is happening a lot here in Ohio. A lot of the mineral rights are being sold to foreign companies. And these are national security risks. And so it's about finding the areas that serve both parties, be they, political parties or different geographic locations, and working together in that way. Like, we're all in this together. We're all in this together. And our growth is our surrounding neighbors' growth as well.
We're talking to U.S. House Ohio District 6 Democrat nominee Michael Kripchak. He'll be facing Michael Ruley, the Republican nominee, in next Tuesday's election, a special election. It's June 11th. And no matter my disclaimer that I make is no matter which side you're on, go vote. You want to go and make sure you have your voice heard. So with that being said, Michael, we got about 20 minutes left, 15, 20 minutes.
Roger that.
And so I want to hit a couple more topics, but we do have some folks here watching and asking some questions. I want to stick with economic development for Phil Wallace. He asks, how do you feel about foreign countries buying properties in our country? Those properties might be for economic development. A lot of times we do see the companies that come in are foreign companies, not American based. Do you have a preference there? I mean, there's a lot of brownfields here along in Ohio 6 that have potential to be used for something. Yeah. Where do you kind of lie on that?
Well, look, so even before I started running for office, I was made aware of the stat that 70% of our open water ports are owned by China. Right? This is what happens when you start selling property and land and areas such as ports to foreign nations just because they're the highest bidder, right? This is a national security risk. Yeah, so that is my feeling on it. I am uncomfortable with it, is the lightest way to say it.
Let's see if we have anything else we can. Any other questions?
And like, look, there are steps that can be taken by Congress. There are laws that can be passed. There are different agreements that can be made to protect property rights in our country. And look, I'm all for free trade, but it has to ultimately serve the American people first, right? That's the baseline. And being an elected representative of our district, I would say it would have to serve our district first as well. And these deals don't serve our district.
I want to circle back. We talked the other night when we talked with your opponent. We talked about the cracker plant in Belmont County, which has been at a standstill for several years now. Billions of dollars invested, and it hasn't gotten off the ground. With that current situation, if you were to be elected? Is that something you would even pursue at this point, or it's just sitting there? And residents particularly in our area, Belmont County folks are concerned. What's going on with this?
Look, the issue with cracker plants is that they're basically burn pits. If you look at the cracker plant that's over in I think it's a Beaver County over in Pennsylvania. Look, that plant promised just like the same promises we're getting with fracking. Small businesses are going to pop up. This is going to cause tons of economic growth, tons of economic development, and that has been an active plant, and it's not happening. It's not working, right? These are false promises. And again, I feel like any vet should be taking offense to this, because cracker plants are veritable burn pits, right? You're just burning chemicals and burning materials. So look, and my opponent also likes to say, I'm going to get the EPA out of the way. We have to remember that we are the area of the nation where our rivers used to catch on fire, right? We can't forget that heritage either. And right, these things are linked to birth defects. They are linked to poisoned water sources. Like, are there safe ways to do them? Yes. Would I work against it, especially if the local communities were for it? No. But it's not regulation keeping this from happening. It's just economic conditions that are keeping it from happening.
We did get another question regarding women's rights. Issue 1 passes in Ohio last year. What's kind of your stance on that? Obviously, Ohio's has issue 1 that's been passed, but from a federal standpoint, and of course, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which we saw last year.
And my opponent liked to say, I respect the will of the people. I mean, no, he doesn't, or else he'd be in the Senate right now fighting to push through affirming issue 1's passage into prescribed law, and he's not. The Republican State Senate, and the Republican State House are working against it, trying to find every way to not have to put it into effect. Same thing with issue 2. A woman's body is not the domain of the government, federal, state, or local, right? It is up to a woman and her doctor to make these decisions. That being said, as at many times throughout our nation's history, when the rights and freedoms of people are being affected and impacted and limited, the federal government does sometimes need to come in and make sure that those rights and freedoms are secured. So I am behind supporting a nationwide, I guess we have a nationwide law to protect abortion access and reproductive rights and contraception, right? We got to understand there's a House bill in the Ohio State House that has language in it to limit contraception access, right? There is no limits to this because it's based off of an extremism point of view. And I don't suffer extremism from either side or either direction, because extremism only begets more extremism. So regardless of my personal feelings, right, raised Catholic, on abortion, it's not my place. to impose that will onto someone's choice, especially when it comes to IVF, contraception, and I'd say specifically when it comes to protecting a woman's health, right? Many times abortion procedures are performed because something is happening that is unhealthy and destructive to the woman bearing the child, or even getting to that point, right? That can happen at any point in the pregnancy. I think I was very pleased with the verbiage and the how issue 1 stated the limits on abortion and the different caveats. I thought issue 1 was actually really well written.
Want to remind you, you have a chance to ask a question of potential future Congressman, Democrat Michael Kripchak. We got about 15 minutes left. I got a couple quick hitters that we'll go through at the end, but we do have a couple more topics I want to get to, one of them being infrastructure, and it kind of leads into a comment that we got here. Phil asks, tourism is a huge factor. Can you make tourism easier to get into Eastern Ohio? I want to dovetail that in with infrastructure, which we see issues here in our area in the Ohio Valley all the time, whether it's roads. We just had a story today in Bel Air, right, in Belmont County, roads, potholes, a bridge actually that takes folks who live on one side across a river. A stream that flows into the river, into the Ohio River. It's crumbling. And these folks said, what if, what happens if someone needs to go to the hospital? You got to bring a helicopter in to get these people out. So it's
sad and true. Look, the majority of our infrastructure was built 100 plus years ago, right? This stuff has a lifespan on it. The Infrastructure Act has been incredibly successful. The Inflation Reduction Act has been incredibly successful in rejuvenating bridges, getting broadband internet to communities, doing road repairs, as the road construction that I'm sure has been annoying to many of us, but it is necessary. And we need an Inflation Reduction Act Part 2. And look, the reason it's called Inflation Reduction Act is because when you spend funds on United States resources, on United States workers, it pays for itself 1-to-1, right? Again, leading back to getting the economy actually circulating, right? It endorses businesses to come in, right? Because businesses don't want to come to areas where they don't have ready broadband access, when there's not reliable water and sewage. So it actually helps build our economies up. So as far as from the congressional standpoint, I would absolutely be behind a Inflation Reduction Act Part 2, to quote Hot Shots.
And so with that's kind of helps with the infrastructure. Do you think that would lead to more tourism opportunities?
Yes. Look, one of the best parts about doing this is I get to drive up and down from Youngstown to Steubenville a lot. And this drive is amazing. We have some of the most scenic and incredible, I guess, areas literally in the country. So yes, of course, I think it will help with that. Now, I mean, right, it's hard to not bring it back to fracking, right? If we want people to stay here, if we want people to move here, if we want people to visit here, you don't want a bunch of poison water sources. But I have to make the note that, again, if it's your land, you get to control your mineral rights and you get to sell them and use them as you see fit, right? First and foremost, this is America. My point is, we can't make our entire economy dependent upon this, or else you want to make tourism drop, have some tragic accident happen. That'll make it drop. Like the recent flooding. I believe it was down I was down talking with the United Steelworkers, how they were telling me, you would probably know, the plant it was supposed to be a scrubbing plant for
I know there was
fracking brine.
I know there was flooding down in Marietta.
Yeah,
back in April.
Yeah.
There was some down there, Powhatan Point, which is just at the bottom of our coverage area, Hannibal down that way. Was it perhaps down that way?
Eddie, sorry to bring you into this. There's the name of the facility. There's a facility that was designed to clean up fracking brine, and they got to overcapacity. And I think there's something going through with the state attorney general right now. In any case,
right in Martins Ferry.
Yes, yeah.
Austin Master Services.
There we go. Thank you very much. Like they were telling me that if the water's raised 2 more feet, that would have flooded. That would have destroyed the river. Right? 2 feet away from flood levels getting high enough so that would have overflowed. Right? Something like that will destroy your tourism. Guaranteed.
We got 10 minutes left, and I want to get in this question because we talked about it the other night. How will you secure Social Security benefits? So just your approach to Social Security and Medicaid for the elderly population.
Ensure they get funded. Look, if you're not aware of it, and you could even find clips talking about this on Fox News, where their hosts were interviewing the House Republicans, and they were like, wait a second, your proposal is to raise retirement age and remove prescription drug caps and to lessen Medicare coverage and increase its costs. And they're like, yep, this is what we have to do. We don't have to do that, right? This is their literal plan, is to go after Social Security and Medicare, right? We could get into all sorts of reasons why. Whatever the reasons are, they're bunk. To put it politely. Look, removing the income cap on Social Security costs, Social Security contribution, there's an income cap. If you make above a certain amount of money, you top off and you don't have to contribute a higher percentage, more of your income. Removing that will go to great lengths to do this. Like, we need to bring in joint negotiation of drug costs in our country. We are one of the only developed nations, if not the only developed nation on the planet that doesn't do this. The biggest handout we have is the drug companies, right? Because, and the argument that if we bring in joint negotiation, these companies will never be able to survive. Hold on a second. Every other nation does it but us. So we need to give them the handout because they're going to fail if we do what everyone else is doing. And it works great for their country. They keep their prescription costs under check and we can't. It's one of the most surefire ways to reduce Medicare costs is that.
Couple quick hitters as we wrap up here with U.S. House Ohio Democrat District 6 congressional nominee. I think I may have mixed some of my words there, but that's all what it is, right?
That's good. English is amazing. You can do that with it.
Yeah. So, Michael Kripchak will be facing Michael Rulli on Tuesday in the special election to finish out Bill Johnson's term after he resigned in January to take the job at Youngstown State University. As we wrap up, one issue that you want to get to work on immediately if you're elected on Tuesday.
Yeah, we covered that a few times. But that's the farmstead exemption for our farmers to make it easier for them to pass on their farms down to their next of kin. Open shut. Look, there used to be a gentleman's agreement between the parties that you don't mess with our farmers. And we have a farm bill that doesn't get renewed. It just gets extended, right? So, which means no matter how archaic it already was, it's out of date. So yes, that is my first and foremost goal. And anyone who fights against that happening, I will ensure that their constituents know that it was their representative that kept that from getting through.
What is one area that needs to be addressed but might take some time?
Education, right? We're talking about revamping our education system in the nation, right? And rightfully so, states have the vast majority of influence and control on their education system. So I always knew getting into this, we needed to go after education and help them out because there's been a concerted effort to defund public education in our nation. And I'm sorry, but educating our citizens of tomorrow is not a profit-making venture. It is a public service. It is a public good. So yeah, I understand that my education initiatives will be the ones that take the longest, even longer than commercializing fusion.
We talked about infrastructure. We brushed over broadband. We do have a question for Margie. Will you work to bring back the Affordable Connectivity Program, or do you have some other vision for expanding broadband access?
Look, for me, I lump that into infrastructure, right? I've been hearing stories up in Columbiana. They were telling me that, like, to do online homework, their kids have to go to McDonald's because they don't have broadband out to their homes, right? This is preposterous. And this is a specific case where the government can come in and help out to get outlay of, say, broadband again. Because, look, it's the same thing with research and development. That's why, like, throughout history, even kings and queens were the fun ones funding research and Newton and so on and so forth. Because it's inherently inefficient. Getting broadband to rural communities and just when there's only a few people in a certain area, it's inefficient. So I understand why companies are hesitant to do the outlay because of the costs incurred by them. But this is exactly where the government needs to come in and say, hey, no, we have people that we need to serve. We have people that need to be connected to the rest of the nation and the world. And so, as with the Inflation Reduction Act, outlay infrastructure, yes, absolutely. I think the government has a huge part to play in that, because I understand how inherently inefficient it is. So businesses shy of doing things that.
My final question for you tonight: what will you do to make sure? Of course, this is a big district. We've talked about that. Youngstown and Marietta often get a lot of the funding or attention. Some could argue, especially from around this area. What will you make sure to do? The southern part of Ohio 6, the Ohio Valley, doesn't remain as forgotten.
Well, primarily, again, such a big focus of mine is on our farmers, such as making sure our rural communities are connected. So I think that starts to include a majority of the area you're talking about. But then also one of the reasons, so if you want to read about our manufacturing plan, our manufacturing corridor, it's called the Mahoning Marietta Manufacturing Corridor. You could go to my website, www.kripchak.com, Kilo Romeo, India Papa, Charlie Hotel, Alpha Kilo, and go to press releases. And there, the last press release, you'll see what we call the Marietta Project. But I thought that name was too exclusive. We call it the Marietta Project because their background in coal. And then also their locality to connecting to a lot of other states. But the whole point, and it's just military tactics, you don't centralize all your resources. You make sure that they are spread out, right? It's so key for us to spread the wealth between Mahoning and Marietta, right? We have such amazing backgrounds and history all throughout the Ohio River, and untapped potential that used to be tapped, and we used to be the powerhouse of our country. And we have an opportunity now to do that again, especially when it comes to being the backbone producer of a lot of green technologies that are being developed now. So that's what I'm going to do, because it is so vitally important for the health of our entire district, for all our communities to be served from an economic standpoint, from a strategic standpoint. Just period.
All right. Michael, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming down and
I really appreciate
doing this. We appreciate it. Folks, thank you for watching. Thank you for your questions and comments. One last thing.
So I do mean it when I say, please look some of this stuff up. If you feel like there's a topic that you found interesting, if I mentioned something that sounded zany or wacky and doesn't make sense, message me, vote@kripchak.com. Go to my website, fill out the box that says any comments or anything like that. I don't want to be another talking head just babbling at you, right? That's not how we're going to pull all of us up. I needed to gain a tremendous amount of understanding to get to where I am on a higher level, and of course, talking to people individually. And I recommend that you do the same, because that is the best way that we grow as a people. So please don't take my word for it. Go look it up.
Michael, thank you. You have the chance to voice your opinion. Cast your ballot on Tuesday. Polls will be open Tuesday, June 11th for the special election for Ohio Congress District 6. We thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to stay tuned to the YouTube channel tonight. A new episode of The Wheeling Feeling with Jamie Baker drops coming up here at 8 o'clock. Thank you to our sponsors, Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration and Wheeling Island Hotel Casino Racetrack, for that. So again, that's coming up right now. So we just had a nice serious talk about politics. Now you can go see what fun events are going on in Wheeling this weekend.
That's an excellent title. I'm sorry. The Wheeling Feeling. That's incredible.
Michael, thanks so much for coming in. Thank you all for watching, and good night.